We all had our trays, and I told you guys, remember what I told you? I said, take care of late night. If you take care of late night will take care of you.
Conan O'Brien is known for his sharp wit, absurd humor, and keeping his cool with even the strangest guests. But not every moment on his couch ended in laughter. Over the years, a few interviews went so off the rails, so tense, that Conan's smile started to crack, and the grudges that followed lasted decades. From chaotic filmmakers to late-night rivals, and even close friends, some guests pushed him past the point of comedy. These aren't just awkward interviews. These are the rare moments when Conan O'Brien truly couldn't stand someone. Join us as we uncover the guests Conan O'Brien utterly hated, the clashes you never saw coming, and the real stories behind the jokes. The Anatomy of Conan. Conan Christopher O'Brien was born on April 18, 1963, in Brookline, Massachusetts. He grew up in a strict yet intellectually driven household. His father was a physician and professor at Harvard Medical School, and his mother was a lawyer. Conan wasn't raised around show business, but he developed a love for writing and performing at a young age. He was quiet, observant, and drawn to humor that was smart, unexpected, and slightly strange. In high school, Conan excelled academically, becoming valedictorian of Brookline High School. He also wrote comedy pieces for the school newspaper and performed in small school shows. Unlike many future entertainers, he didn't chase acting right away, he chased writing. That decision shaped his entire career. After high school, Conan attended Harvard University, where he joined the Harvard Lampoon, the famous humor magazine known for producing top comedy writers. He became president of the Lampoon twice, an extremely rare achievement. It was there that he refined his style, intelligent, absurd, and layered with mock seriousness. When he graduated in 1985, Conan didn't try to become an actor or stand-up comedian. Instead, he went to work behind the scenes, joining Saturday Night Live as a writer in 1988. At SNL, he worked on sketches during a key era, creating bizarre, memorable pieces that stood out for their strangeness. He was known for pitching ideas that made people laugh and then ask, "How did you even think of that?" In 1991, Conan left SNL and spent time writing and producing for various projects. Notably, he joined The Simpsons writing staff, where he wrote episodes like Marge versus the Monorail, widely considered one of the show's greatest and strangest episodes. His work on The Simpsons proved he could create humor that was both surreal and beloved by millions. His life changed completely in 1993. NBC was searching for a new host to replace David Letterman on Late Night after Letterman moved to CBS. Conan, then an unknown writer with almost no on-camera experience, was approached to audition. It was a massive risk. Even Conan doubted himself, but NBC executives believed his weirdness and intelligence could translate to TV. On September 13, 1993, Late Night with Conan O'Brien premiered. The reviews were harsh. People said he was awkward, nervous, and too strange for mainstream television. But Conan didn't quit. Instead, he leaned deeper into his odd humor, self-deprecating monologues, nonsensical sketches, and random characters who made no sense but became cult icons. By the late 90s, Conan had built a fiercely loyal fan base. He wasn't the most traditional host, but he was the most distinct. College students, comedy writers, and insomniacs made him a legend. Over time, his wit and self-awareness turned doubt into admiration. In 2009, when he finally inherited The Tonight Show, it was the fulfillment of a plan NBC made years earlier. But that milestone also marked the beginning of his most public conflict, a clash that would define how fiercely he guarded the creative world he built. Abel Ferrara. In 1996, filmmaker Abel Ferrara appeared on Late Night with Conan O'Brien to promote his movie The Funeral. What should have been a normal interview turned into one of the most chaotic and uncomfortable moments in late-night history. Even decades later, people still talk about it as the episode that nearly broke Conan. Ferrara arrived at NBC's Rockefeller Center in a condition that immediately worried the crew. According to Conan and people who worked on the show, Ferrara seemed intoxicated before cameras even started rolling. When it came time for his segment, Ferrara actually ran away from the studio, forcing stagehands to go find him and bring him back. Conan later said Ferrara came on camera against his will. By the time he sat down, it was obvious that this was not going to be an ordinary interview. On air, Ferrara slurred his words, fidgeted restlessly, and gave answers that made no sense. He would start a sentence, lose his train of thought, and then drift into another topic entirely. The audience laughed awkwardly, unsure whether it was a joke or a meltdown. Conan, clearly nervous, tried to keep the conversation on track. He asked questions about the film, Ferrara's process, and his reputation as a rebellious filmmaker, but Ferrara either ignored him or mumbled incoherently. At several points, Ferrara interrupted Conan and spoke directly to the audience or to people off camera. The host's usual confidence and comedic rhythm disappeared. He tried to play along and keep things light, but it was clear that Ferrara was completely out of control. Conan's smile started to look forced, and his eyes kept darting to the crew for help. You could feel the tension coming through the screen. The audience didn't know how to react. Some laughed out of discomfort. Others stayed silent. Conan, who was still early in his hosting career at that time, had never faced a guest this unpredictable. He kept trying to save the interview, but Ferrara wasn't giving him anything to work with. What was supposed to be a 7-minute segment felt painfully long. When it finally ended, Conan sighed in relief, visibly drained. The studio staff later said that it was one of the hardest segments they had ever produced. Discomfort. Over 20 years later, Conan still remembered that night vividly and not fondly. In 2018, during an appearance on Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast, he was asked about the worst guest he ever had. Without hesitation, he said, "Abel Ferrara." He didn't laugh when he said it. He described the experience as horrible and impossible, saying Ferrara was clearly drunk and that the entire situation was chaotic from start to finish. Conan told the story with the same mix of disbelief and exhaustion he must have felt that night. He fled the building, Conan said. He literally ran away. Then they found him, dragged him back, and somehow he came on camera against his will. It's a story that sounds funny on paper, but the way Conan told it, you could tell it left a real mark on him. He wasn't exaggerating for laughs. He genuinely hated how it went down. Behind the scenes, NBC staff were horrified. Producers were caught completely off guard. They had assumed Ferrara would be a fascinating, edgy guest given his reputation for making dark, controversial films. Instead, they got a man who could barely sit upright. People in the control room scrambled to decide whether to cut the segment short or write it out. They ultimately let it play, hoping Conan could hold it together, which he did, but barely. After the taping, there were heated discussions among the staff about what went wrong. One crew member reportedly said, "Never again." Ferrara's name went on an informal "do not invite" list, and even years later, the story circulated among new producers as a warning about unpredictable guests. The entire experience became something of a legend inside the late-night offices. Even though Ferrara later claimed he barely remembered the appearance, the memory stayed sharp for Conan. When he called the interview horrible, it wasn't just about the awkwardness. It was about how powerless he felt in his own studio. That's rare for someone like Conan, who's built his career on being able to handle anything thrown at him. But this one guest broke through that calm, and he never forgot it. By the time he told the story on the podcast decades later, the frustration was still in his voice. "I hated having him on," Conan said flatly. That kind of honesty showed it wasn't a showbiz feud. It was a scar from a real professional nightmare. And if you thought that was bad, wait until you hear about the guest who betrayed him on a much bigger stage. Jay Leno. When Conan O'Brien first joined NBC in the early 1990s, Jay Leno was already a big name in late-night television. Leno had taken over The Tonight Show from Johnny Carson in 1992, and Conan had just started his own show, Late Night with Conan O'Brien, which aired right after Leno's program. At the time, Conan admired Leno. He saw him as a veteran of stand-up comedy and someone who had worked hard to earn his spot. Conan was new, nervous, and struggling to find his voice. Leno, meanwhile, was the face of NBC late-night television. Even though they were technically colleagues, there was always a bit of competition between them. Late Night was meant to appeal to a younger audience, while The Tonight Show targeted older viewers. Conan respected Leno's experience, but he also wanted to prove himself. Over time, Conan developed his own loyal fan base and became known for his smart, offbeat humor. His comedy was stranger and riskier than Leno's, and many viewers saw Conan as the future of late-night television. Behind the scenes, NBC executives seemed to agree. They viewed Conan as the next generation of talent who could keep The Tonight Show going for decades. As early as the mid-2000s, NBC began planning for a smooth transition. The network told Conan that once Leno stepped down, he would take over The Tonight Show. It was supposed to be a peaceful handoff, a sign of respect and continuity. But as history showed, nothing about that handoff turned out peaceful. The conflict that destroyed their relationship started in 2009. NBC finally gave The Tonight Show to Conan, just as they had promised. Leno retired from the show, but was given a new primetime program called The Jay Leno Show, which aired earlier in the evening. It was NBC's attempt to keep both stars happy, but the plan quickly failed. Leno's new show got terrible ratings and hurt the local news numbers that aired afterward. Suddenly, the network panicked. NBC executives decided they wanted to move Leno back to late night, right into Conan's territory. They proposed pushing The Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien to a later time so that Leno could have a new show at 11:35 p.m., the traditional Tonight Show slot. This would have made Conan's version of The Tonight Show air at 12:05 a.m., technically the next day. It was an insult to Conan and everything he'd worked for. After only 7 months in the job he'd dreamed of for years, NBC wanted to move him aside. Conan refused. In a public statement, he said he would not be part of a plan that damaged the legacy of The Tonight Show. He didn't want to push the show into the next day just to protect NBC's failed experiment with Leno. Fans rallied behind him. The story became national news. Late-night television, normally a friendly world of jokes and interviews, turned into a full-blown media war. In early 2010, NBC made their decision. They gave the show back to Jay Leno, and Conan was forced to leave. He had worked at NBC for 17 years and had dreamed of that hosting job since childhood, and now it was gone. He was publicly humiliated, but he didn't lash out directly. Instead, he handled it with humor, which made the situation both funny and heartbreaking. When his final Tonight Show episode aired, he thanked NBC for making it so hard to leave, a line that perfectly captured the mix of pain and sarcasm that defined the moment. The network's reputation took a hit, and so did Leno's. Many viewers felt that Leno had betrayed Conan. Leno, for his part, claimed it wasn't personal, that he was just doing what NBC asked. But for Conan, it was a deep personal wound. It felt like a promise broken and a friendship destroyed. After leaving NBC, Conan turned his anger into comedy. When he eventually started his new show on TBS, Conan, he didn't hide how he felt. He made fun of the situation constantly, using jokes and sketches to take small, sharp jabs at Leno and NBC. One of his favorite targets was Leno's image as a bland, middle-aged comedian who rode motorcycles and collected cars. Conan's writers often used that image to mock him. They'd show exaggerated clips or fake headlines about Leno's garage full of luxury vehicles, while the rest of the world struggled. The beard and motorcycle jokes became shorthand for Leno's obsession with his image and material success. Conan's monologues also included clever digs about greed and loyalty. He never named Leno outright in every joke, but everyone knew who he was talking about. His humor was cutting but still funny enough to keep audiences laughing. Fans loved how Conan handled the feud, with class, wit, and creativity rather than bitterness. Even years later, whenever the topic came up, Conan would find a way to turn the pain into another laugh. At its core, Conan's hatred for Jay Leno wasn't about losing a job. It was about losing trust. Conan believed in loyalty and fairness. He thought NBC's promise meant something and that Leno would step aside with grace. When that didn't happen, it shattered his respect. He saw Leno as someone who cared more about keeping his spot than keeping his word. In later interviews, Conan never used cruel language, but his tone said it all. He described the experience as painful and disappointing. He admitted that he didn't hold any grudges, but his words always carried a sting of honesty. It was clear he viewed Leno's actions as dishonorable. For a man like Conan, who valued principle and sincerity, that was unforgivable. The feud became one of the most famous rivalries in TV history, not just because of what happened, but because it revealed two very different types of comedians and two very different kinds of people. But if Leno's betrayal stung deeply, what came next from the NBC higher-ups made it even worse. Jeff Zucker. Behind the public feud between Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien, there was another figure pulling the strings. Jeff Zucker, the NBC executive who oversaw the entire disaster. At the time, Zucker was the president and CEO of NBC Universal. He had risen through the company after starting as a producer on The Today Show, and he was known for being smart, confident, and sometimes ruthless. When the late-night chaos began, Zucker was the one in charge of keeping both Leno and Conan happy. Instead, he managed to alienate them both and turn NBC's proudest brand into a national joke. In 2004, NBC made a public promise to Conan. He would take over The Tonight Show in 2009 when Jay Leno's contract ended. Zucker helped make that deal happen. It seemed like a smart, long-term move at the time. Leno would step aside gracefully, and Conan would bring a younger audience to the legendary show. But as the transition got closer, Leno made it clear he wasn't ready to go. That's when Zucker's juggling act began. Instead of standing firm on the promise, NBC tried to please everyone. Zucker created a new plan to keep Leno on the network with The Jay Leno Show, which aired at 10 p.m. This move was risky. It broke decades of network tradition and upset local affiliates who depended on strong ratings from scripted shows before the late-night block. When Leno's show flopped, those same affiliates complained loudly. Zucker panicked and made another decision that changed late-night history. He wanted to move Leno back to 11:35 p.m. and push The Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien to a later time slot. That plan made no sense to anyone outside NBC headquarters. It would have turned The Tonight Show into the next day show. Conan was furious, and rightfully so. He released a public statement refusing to go along with the plan, saying that it would damage the greatest franchise in television. In response, Zucker backed Leno, not Conan. He blamed the mess on ratings and claimed that the network had no choice. Within weeks, Conan was pushed out, and Leno got his old job back. Zucker tried to make it sound like a simple business decision, but to Conan, it felt personal. It was betrayal disguised as management. Conan never confronted Zucker directly after leaving NBC. He didn't need to. Instead, he used his greatest weapon, comedy. His humor became his form of revenge. On his TBS show, Conan, and in interviews, he began slipping in small but brutal jokes about Zucker and NBC's leadership. He never yelled or cursed. He just mocked Zucker with sharp wit, letting laughter do the damage. During his final weeks on The Tonight Show, when the feud was at its peak, Conan made dozens of jokes about NBC's decision-making. He pretended to thank executives for their wisdom, then followed it with punchlines about them running the company into the ground. In one episode, he featured fake NBC ads promoting ridiculous programs like things that will fail or shows we'll cancel tomorrow. It was obvious who he was talking about. These jokes were his way of exposing how clueless the network's leadership looked from the outside. He even made props part of the revenge. During one sketch, Conan introduced a cardboard cutout of Jeff Zucker and carried it around the studio, pretending to ask for his approval. It became a running gag that symbolized the executive's obsession with control. The more Conan mocked Zucker, the more audiences loved him for it. People saw him as the underdog fighting against corporate nonsense, and Zucker became the villain in the story. When Conan did his thank you tour after leaving NBC, he kept Zucker's name alive in his act. He joked about how NBC had spent millions to keep him off the air and how they'd lost viewers in the process. Every laugh at those jokes was a small victory. It wasn't rage or revenge in a loud way. It was quiet, funny, and devastating. By the time Conan launched his TBS show later that year, Zucker had left NBC and was taking heat for the network's decline. NBC's ratings dropped and its reputation took a serious hit. Conan didn't have to say much. His silence and steady humor did all the talking. Late-night TV had turned into a battlefield, and Conan won his part of the war with jokes that never stopped hitting. Years later, Jeff Zucker tried to rewrite the story. In interviews and memoir-style reflections, he claimed the whole Tonight Show mess wasn't personal. It was just business. He said NBC made the decisions it thought were best at the time, and that Conan simply didn't deliver the ratings they expected. Zucker framed it as a case of numbers, contracts, and network strategy. In his version, there were no villains, just tough choices. Conan saw it differently. In his eyes, it wasn't a business issue. It was a moral one. He had been promised something, worked hard for it, and then watched it get taken away by people who lacked courage. For him, Zucker's decisions represented the worst side of corporate television. People at the top protecting themselves and blaming others when things went wrong. Even years later, when asked about the experience, Conan's tone stayed calm but bitter. He said that he had no personal hatred for anyone, but that the way NBC handled things showed a lack of integrity. His words were measured, but the emotion behind them was clear. He didn't forget how it felt to be betrayed by someone who had once seemed like a supporter. Fans never forgot either. In the public eye, Zucker's reputation was tied to that late-night disaster. Even when he later became the head of CNN, people still brought up how he mishandled The Tonight Show. Meanwhile, Conan continued to build a career defined by humor, creativity, and independence. Everything Zucker's world of corporate television wasn't. Conan turned pain into laughter, and Zucker turned excuses into press statements. It was clear who the audience trusted more. But even among friends, Conan's humor could turn sharp, and one co-star found himself on the receiving end next. Jack McBrayer. Jack McBrayer was never supposed to be one of Conan O'Brien's enemies. In fact, he was one of Conan's favorite recurring guests for years. The two had a long professional friendship that started when McBrayer appeared as a guest on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and later continued on Conan during the TBS era. McBrayer, known for his bright, cheerful personality and his role as Kenneth Parcell on 30 Rock, seemed like the last person anyone could dislike. But when McBrayer visited Conan's shows, something odd always happened. The friendly vibe between them often took a strange turn. What started as light teasing quickly grew into something that made viewers uncomfortable. Conan, known for his sharp wit and love of awkward humor, often turned McBrayer into the butt of the joke. He'd mock McBrayer's southern accent, his clean-cut image, and his almost childlike innocence. At first, these jokes felt playful, like how comedians tease their friends on talk shows. But as time went on, the tone shifted. In multiple appearances, Conan took things further, calling McBrayer names and making fun of his personality traits in a way that didn't always seem like a bit. He'd refer to McBrayer as strange, soft, or too nice for his own good. The audience laughed, but McBrayer's reactions weren't always smiles. There were moments when his laughter looked forced, and he appeared genuinely uneasy. What made it ironic was that McBrayer wasn't a troublemaker or a controversial figure. He was one of the most wholesome and polite people in comedy. Somehow, that made him a magnet for Conan's teasing. Like the nicer McBrayer acted, the more Conan poked at him. Their chemistry made for memorable TV, but behind the laughs was something that didn't feel entirely scripted. It was as if Conan had some deeper frustration that surfaced every time McBrayer appeared, even if it came out as a joke. Several moments between Conan and McBrayer crossed the line between comedy and real discomfort. In one episode, Conan joked that McBrayer seemed too simple to survive in Hollywood, implying he was naive and sheltered. The crowd laughed, but McBrayer hesitated before smiling. His nervous laugh didn't quite match the energy in the room. Another time, Conan teased him for being soft, both in personality and appearance, saying that he looked like he'd never faced a problem in his life. McBrayer tried to roll with it, responding with polite humor, but viewers could sense tension. It wasn't that Conan was cruel, his tone was playful, but there was an edge to it. He would sometimes interrupt McBrayer mid-story, mocking the way he spoke or exaggerating his politeness. At one point, McBrayer said jokingly, "Why are you so mean to me?" The audience laughed, but the look on his face said there was some truth to the question. These exchanges made fans wonder if there was something more going on between them. Conan's humor often thrived on chaos and discomfort, but when that discomfort came from someone he clearly liked, it became confusing to watch. People began to speculate online that McBrayer's kind-hearted personality triggered Conan's mischievous side, almost like he couldn't resist breaking that wholesome image. Even so, Conan's jokes about McBrayer were never hateful. They were rooted in a dynamic that had been built over years. But when the jokes hit too hard or too often, they left viewers wondering how much of it was scripted. and how much of it was real irritation bubbling to the surface. Over time, the jokes started to have consequences. In later interviews, McBrayer admitted that some of Conan's teasing actually hurt his feelings. He didn't say it in anger, but in an honest, reflective tone. During a conversation on Conan's podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, McBrayer confessed that some of the comments from past shows had stung. He said that even though he knew Conan didn't mean any harm, certain moments crossed a personal line. Conan seemed surprised by the honesty, and for once, he didn't joke it away. He admitted that his comedy style could sometimes go too far. The exchange showed that while both men respected each other deeply, there had been real tension behind their on-screen banter. What the audience saw as comedy had, at times, turned into something more emotional. This moment sparked a broader debate among fans and critics. Was the friction between them a misunderstood friendship, or proof that comedy can sometimes hurt even when it's meant to entertain? Some argued that the awkwardness was part of their act, that Conan and McBrayer intentionally leaned into the tension because it made great television. Others thought it revealed a rare glimpse of the downside of Conan's humor, that even good intentions can land wrong when the jokes hit personal nerves. Whatever the truth, both men handled it with maturity. McBrayer never lashed out publicly or criticized Conan harshly. Conan, in turn, showed remorse and self-awareness when the topic came up again. Their friendship seemed to survive the awkwardness, but the moments they shared on air remain among the most debated interactions of Conan's career. Some fans and writers have speculated that Conan's teasing came from a place of frustration, not hatred, but something close to envy. McBrayer represented everything Conan wasn't. He was effortlessly nice, always cheerful, and never cynical. Conan's humor, built on sarcasm and irony, couldn't fully connect with that kind of goodness. For someone as sharp and self-critical as Conan, McBrayer's constant optimism might have felt almost alien. If you like this deep dive, stick around because there are plenty more wild late-night stories coming.